I was off school and I recorded on video the Grand National. I picked the winner as a 10-year-old, I think it was. And I must have won £5 or something. My dad put the bet on for me. And I watched this race over and over. And I ended up learning the whole, even to this day now, and I'm going back to 1980, I can still remember some of the commentary from the Grand National of 1980. But I could do it for you now, but I won't. I started impersonating the voice of the commentator, and I learned the word for it verbatim because I must have watched it 20, 30 times. So there were signs there. I did amateur dramatics as well. So there were signs there, but it never entered my head really that I could be a commentator.
Welcome to a new episode of Origins of a Sports Commentator. I'm here with Richard Kaufman, and we're going to have a little fireside chat about his upbringings as a sports commentator, how he got where he is today, and what are his suggestions for sports fans and sports pundits out there who want to tap into the broadcasting world. Richard, welcome. Thanks for being with me today.
Pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Could you tell the audience where are you at right now in the world? Where are you tuning in from?
Well, it's a big rarity. I'm actually here at home, reacquainting myself with the family. I spent the first sort of 3 months of the year pretty much globetrotting in parts of Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and been based at home for the last few weeks. Getting back to doing some more football commentating. We'll be doing so probably until the end of the season, although I am popping off to Florida next month. So reacquainting myself with my family at the moment. So it's really nice.
Wow, cool. So you're taking a break from all the stress of traveling the globe. And for everyone who doesn't know you, perhaps you can share a few bits and bobs about your career, where people can find you and hear you on the television today and enjoy your commentary.
Yeah, so most of my work's on Sky Sports Golf as well, generally. So I'm a main lead commentator for the European Tour, Ladies European Tour, PGA Tour, covering majors this year, Solheim Cup, Ryder Cup, that kind of thing. Next week, I'm going to be commentating on a UEFA Champions League semi-final between Bayern Munich or München, depending on what part of the world you're from, against Manchester City. I think we all know which way that's going to go, but one of the keys to commentary, expect the unexpected. I did the Manchester City semi-final at Real Madrid last year, and we all know how that changed in the 90th minute of the second leg. So anything can happen. Yeah. So yeah, you can catch me on UEFA.com, commentating on that. I'm commentating on the world feed for some of the Eredivisie matches as well, and I'll be in the studio at Sky week after next, doing some golf tournaments for a couple of weeks before I then fly off to Florida for an event out there. So that's where I'm at the moment. But over the years, people would have heard me have my own show on Talk Sport, on Sky Sports News. I've been on the BBC, all the main channels really, not just in the UK, but internationally too. So I do a lot of world feeds on NBC in the United States, and I could go on, but I think people get the gist.
It's fascinating. You really accumulated a lot of experience over the past 30 years, and we're going to tap into that a bit later. I brought 5 questions that I would like to ask you today, and in one way or another are all related to your career and the possibility of becoming a sports commentator for a young sports expert, pundit, sports fan today. And the first thing that I'm curious about is, how did everything start for you? What was your first attempt of commentating, and how old were you at the time?
Well, in some respects, I didn't really start my career until I was broadcasting until 18 or 19. So one of the questions I was asking myself, knowing we were going to chat today, was, had I always known that I was going to be a commentator? Like I listened to an interview recently with Derek Ray. He's the commentator, does many of the international broadcasts. He's been in America as well, ESPN, but you'll probably know him best as the voice of FIFA, the video game. And he tells this story when he was a kid, growing up like 10, 11, 12, 13, those sort of ages, he'd take a tape recorder. I think his team was Clyde in Scotland, and he would commentate into this tape recorder while the match was going on. God knows what everyone around him would have thought, but they got used to it in the end, and he became kind of a well-known figure, this kid commentator again. Obviously, I didn't do that. There were signs there. So sign number one, playing Subbuteo, even on my own. I mean, looking back, it's a little bit sad, but I was the youngest of three. I have two older sisters, so that while they were all off, I was at home killing hours playing Subbuteo, and I would commentate while I was doing the Subbuteo. Also with friends as well, I'd have these magazines. We had Roy of the Rovers magazine, and I'd read out loud the commentary that was in within these magazines as well. And I did, at the age of 12, 13, I was doing stand-up comedy, but my comedy was a lot of impersonations of major sports figures. So if people were old enough that would know, people like David Coleman, who were, oh, it's quite remarkable, 1-0, and all this this kind of thing. There was John Motson, who was the main football commentator, unfortunately just passed away. I remember, because the Grand National's coming up as we're speaking this weekend, which is a big horse race, and I had the chicken pox, and I was off school, and I recorded on video the Grand National. I picked the winner as a 10-year-old, I think it was, and I must have won £5 or something. My dad put the bet on for me, and I watched this race over and over, and I ended up learning the whole, I mean, even to this day now, and I'm going back to 1980, I can still remember some of the commentary from the Grand National of 1980. I mean, I could do it for you now, but I won't. I started impersonating the voice of the commentator, and I learned the word for it verbatim, because I must have watched it 20, 30 times. So there were signs there. I did amateur dramatics as well. So there were signs there, but it never entered my head really that I could be a commentator. And then when I was still a student, sixth form student, before I went to university, I lived locally to the AA, which was the Automobile Association, not Alcoholics Anonymous on this occasion. And they had a broadcasting unit within, and I knew someone there. I was local, I could walk in, and I got work basically typing in traffic reports so that people could read on their television the traffic news. And then I was allowed to go on the radio and broadcast my first traffic report. And then I started thinking, well, maybe this is something I could do. So while I was at university, I didn't really do too much about it. But coming out, my first jobs were a runner on the TV program Whose Line Is It Anyway, which was an improv show which was big in the United States, UK, and around the world. And I managed, through a lot of improvisation, which is, I think, the biggest step I had to where I am now. I managed to get a job at Capital Gold Sport, which was the biggest independent sports station in the UK at the time, i.e. non-BBC. And I managed to get a job as a reporter for Capital Gold. So by that period now, 22, that sort of age, it's the first year of the Premier League in England. That's when I started thinking, okay, yeah, this could be a career for me.
Fascinating. Yeah. And you mentioned impersonation. A lot of experts out there, they say that the best way to learn is to start impersonating and then develop your own style from there. Now, when did you start taking it seriously? You mentioned early 20s, 21, 22, at the beginning of the Premier League. Is that when you realized this could be actually a career for you?
Yeah, you hope so. I mean, as someone who's starting out, Capital Gold Sport, most of my jobs were just on a Saturday. And I'd be going to places like Barnet, Orient, Fulham, who were my team, but lower down the leagues in those days, doing reports, or we'd be in the studio at Capital Gold and we'd listen to what was club call. So club call was what you could phone up a telephone number and listen to the commentary of your team. So we'd listen to that, and the commentator who was on club call would say, Leighton Orient has scored, Joe Bloggs has scored the goal, right footed, and then you'd run into the studio, you pretend you're at the ground, and you go, it's Leighton Orient 1, Stockport 0, and off you go. So that's how, at that point, I was thinking, no one's complaining. In fact, I was getting decent feedback, and I was getting within the first year, more jobs. So not just the Saturday, some of the stuff midweek. They'd even, you get the opportunity, say you were doing a League Cup match. I remember doing a Wycombe Wanderers. I can't remember who they were playing, but they were playing a team from the top flight. And it went to extra time and penalties. Now, the main broadcast was Jonathan Pearce, who's still a famous sports broadcaster now. He was the sort of the head of Capital Gold Sport on air. He was the editor, if you like. And so he'd be commentating on the main match, but that had finished. So they'd come to me for snippets of commentary. So I started doing commentary. Then when it was the penalty shootout, I held it, did the penalty shootout. And I remember Jonathan, a few days later or the next day, maybe when I went in, was very complimentary. And I think he kind of thought, okay, this guy can do it. The fact that I had done it made me think, yeah, I can do this. And so that's probably when I started taking it seriously, as, okay, how can I now kick on from this? So that was within the first year of me working at Capital Gold.
So you mentioned feedback. Now, feedback is extremely helpful and probably necessary, actually, to get where you are today. Did you have any help other than that to help you get where you are today?
No, so I didn't know. I knew someone who worked at the AA for the AA Road Watch the Traffic broadcast. I knew someone who worked in the production company of Hattrick Productions, who made Whose Line Is It Anyway? That's how I got the job as a runner. In sport, I knew no one. I didn't know anybody. I basically got off my backside, made a tape, interviewed Les Ferdinand, who went into my dad's friend's record shop to buy records, managed to ask him to ask Les. Les played for England, is now still involved in football, working in Queen's Park Rangers. And him and Clive Wilson. I did an interview with them pre-season back in 1991 or 1992, whenever it might have been. And I put this tape together, used the music from Capital Gold Sport, sent it off to them. I just literally wrote a letter, posted the tape, hoping to hear back, got a letter to come back to say, come in for an audition of such. And that's how I got in. I didn't know anybody. I was applying through jobs in the Guardian, I think, like BBC trainee, but I had very little experience working in sport apart from me commentating at home on my studio. I didn't have any real experience of sports commentating, so I needed someone to give me a break, give me a chance, and it was through my own initiative and putting this tape together and maybe standing out from the crowd from what they probably had. They were probably inundated with people trying to go on the radio and working for what was the biggest sports station outside of the BBC. And obviously they liked what they heard, and off I went, did the audition. They liked what they heard there as well, and I was given an opportunity.
So you mentioned Les Ferdinand, who to the football fans out there my age still is a very well-known figure. Now, were you ever intimidated as a sports commentator by famous athletes that you were potentially perhaps co-commentating with or just meeting on a day-to-day basis? And when did you stop being intimidated?
Yeah,
if that ever happened.
That's a good question. I mean, that's a good question. Like, here I am 25 years plus later. Am I now blasé about things? The answer is no. I mean, I commentate now with major champions, England internationals. To start with, it was intimidating. I remember, for example, the first Open Championship golf tournament I went to was, I got to interview Seve Ballesteros. Now, he was a hero of mine, the late Seve. And I wish I had a recording of the interview, but I mean, I was so nervous going up to speak to him. You know, my first commentaries, my first time at Capital Golf, for example, we had Bobby Moore as one of the people you were working with. Bobby Moore, the captain of England who lifted the World Cup. I presented a program. When I say I presented a program, I think that's stretching it. I was only at Capital Gold Sport for a couple of years, and as I said, they liked what I did, and they said to me, would you like, we've got a show 90 minutes with Alan Mullery. Now, Alan Mullery played for England multiple times, 50, 60, 70 caps, and he played for Fulham, my football team. So when I first went to Fulham back in the middle 1970s, Alan Mullery and Bobby Moore were in that team. So again, he was a hero of mine sort of growing up, Alan Mullery. And he had this phone-in program, 90 minutes with Mullers, Alan Mullery. And they got me to present the sports headlines during the program. And, which was like, oh my God, I can't believe this, I got to read the classified results. So when play had finished at the end of the day, you know, you go through all the football results across the UK and England and Scotland. I got to read the football results, you know, something I'd grown up listening to over the years. And, you know, there's me. It's kind of, I don't think I was intimidated. I always felt like I'm here for a reason. You know, I've been put in this position to do the sports headlines with Alan Mullery because people obviously think I'm good enough to do that. Here am I commentating, you know, let's say I remember my first days at Talk Sport alongside Stan Collymore, who played for England as well. I felt like, you know, inside, you're like that duck, you know, in the water, paddling underside. You know, there was obviously nerves, a little bit of anxiety, but I always felt if someone was willing to put me there, let's just do it. Let's just go for it. Yes, you know, pinch me. I can't believe I'm sitting in the studio. Alan Mullery's opposite me. He knows my name. He says, you know, thanks, Richard, or all that kind of thing. And it's fantastic. First, everything is always, you know, amazing and sparkly. But yeah, I don't know if I was intimidated, certainly nervous, I think would be the case. And still to this day, sometimes when you get to work alongside someone new who you respect and admire, who's achieved great things in their relevant sport, that you can have a little bit of nervousness about doing that, but you forget that within 5 minutes of being on air.
Amazing. It must be a great feeling to be able to co-present with these famous athletes. Now, you mentioned you started a few decades ago. How would you, and that makes you one of the few sports commentators out there at that level who brings that much experience. Now, I wonder, from your perspective, how did commentating and sports commentating change in the past 30 years for yourself in terms of how you commentate on matches and also what you're seeing in the industry from your peers and so on?
Yeah, you can see there, the grey hairs here. That's how you get from being so long in the industry. Have things changed? Ultimately, we're commentating on 90 minutes of unscripted drama, and there have been amazing commentators throughout the years. So, you know, when I'm growing up, you know, Peter Jones, Ron Jones, you know, these kind of names to watching on TV, Brian Moore, John Motson, you know, to the Martin Tylers now, you know, the people that I was impersonating, you know, John Motsons, and in other sports like, you know, Bill McLaren and Murray Walker in rugby and in Formula One, they were great commentators. And I think we've all drawn something out of people that we admire and respect along the way. Has commentary changed at all over those last 30 years? The answer to that is yes. In some respects, it has. I was once asked by FIFA, for some reason, I don't know why it happened like this, but I assume they didn't have all the originals archived for some of the World Cups. And I got asked to commentate on some of the World Cup matches from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. So I'd re-record. I mean, it sounds kind of bizarre, but I remember thinking, if I'm going to be recording 1960s, now I'm not going to do it in a 1960s voice. And here's Bobby Moore, and now it's Martin Peters. I wasn't going to do it in a silly voice or anything like that, but the style was definitely different back then. It was slower, more deliberate, less words were used. There was no co-commentator then either. And I think now there has become more of a tendency to fill the airwaves, so not let it breathe. You know, when you're watching, particularly on television, on radio, it's very different. You know, you do need to fill that airtime. You have to constantly update people with the scoreline, what's been going on. Where in TV now we have a graphic. That wasn't always the case when I was doing TV commentary. We have a graphic up there that says the score all the time. And there is a tendency to fill that airtime all the time. I think in my style of commentary, as I said, I mentioned I worked for Capital Gold Sport. We were very loud, and it was very different, less staid than the BBC. Maybe going too far to the extreme the other way. I would say my commentary style now is somewhere in between that. Still probably more excited than the traditional BBC, although I do think in the last 5 years or so that even now on the BBC that there isn't a said style like that. So I don't know if I've answered the question there. I think it has changed, but not dramatically, because ultimately we're there to talk about the events that are unfolding in front of us.
Now, this leads to my bonus question. I'm sure that somewhere out there is a young Richard Kaufman who has been impersonating you for several years, and he's waiting to somehow get the opportunity to get a taste of the broadcasting world and show his talents. What, in your opinion, is the fastest way to actually get a taste of the broadcasting world and to try yourself out in one way or another?
Yeah, as someone who wants to be a sports commentator, you're dreaming of the things that I can say now I've done. Commentate the Olympics, World Championships, European Championship football, UEFA Champions League finals, major, the Open, the Ryder Cup, all these kind of things. That's what you want. The chances are, though, you're not going to start there. But whether you're 14 or 40, there is an opportunity for you to get into the sporting arena as a broadcaster. There are, compared to when I started 30 years ago, we talked about whether the style of commentary has changed. The industry has changed a lot. There are now so many more opportunities for people to get into broadcasting at different levels. I've written down, I've got in front of me a piece of paper. I've written down a list of all the different outlets now for, just getting to, I've just written down football. Without boring people, in TV, there's IMG, Premier League Productions, Whisper, which is a production company, BT Sports, Sky Sports, the BBC, ITV, Channel 4. These are all people offering football, live football, Viaplay, UEFA, FIFA, DAZN, Prime Video, S4C in Wales, Pitch International, Gravity Media, Premier Sports. That's just TV. Then there's radio. You've got TalkSport, TalkSport 2, TalkSport International, which need separate commentators to go to an international, BBC Wales, Scotland, Ulster, all the local radio stations, independent radio news. Every club has football TV. So whether it's Rotherham, Stockport, Reading, whoever, there's commentary needed for that. There's There's a company called Alamarch Sport, which provide commentary for blind and visually impaired people. There's hospital radio. There are so many outlets. This is just for football. I'm not talking about any other sport. So there are so many different ways of covering, whether it's the Premier League, the championships, League 1, 2, non-league football, Bundesliga, La Liga, Ligue 1, the Championnat, Champions League, Europa League, Europa Conference League. There is so much out there. So the bottom line is there are opportunities. So you're not going to, you see the credits at the end and you can see the editor of Match of the Day. You can write to him, but he's not going to respond to you. Start somewhere a little bit lower down and do something to make you stand out for the crowd. Try and find, taking my example, your Les Ferdinand moment where you knew someone who knew someone and you get a chance to speak to them. You can contact anyone now on social media. I mean, instantly, direct messaging, whether it's on Instagram or Twitter. And that doesn't have to be someone who's famous in terms of as a sports athlete. You could find out who's the, who runs Viaplay, for example, who looks after, who's the editor of, BBC Scotland, who's in charge, or one of the commentators, I'm sure would say, contact this guy. But I would say before you do any of that, show, anyone can say, oh, I love sport and I think I'd be a good commentator. Show something that makes that real. You have social media now. You can make reels and videos. You can get on, watch the TV, commentate, record that, do your thing and practice to your heart's content so that when you do get an opportunity and when the door hopefully does open, that you can walk through it.
If you guys out there, you're now wondering, could I be one of those candidates that Richard just mentioned? Could I be a future sports commentator? We have actually prepared a little scorecard for you. You will find the link down below under this video, and it literally just takes 5 to maximum 7 minutes to fill out all of the questions. And after that, you will receive a short report that tells you whether you might be a good candidate after all. Richard, thanks for being here with me today. It was a pleasure talking to you. And perhaps you can share one more thing. What are you going to do on the weekend? Any matches planned?
Yeah, so there are matches planned. Just the one match this weekend. Title race in Holland. So looking forward to covering that. For me, that's quite a quiet weekend. So as I said, back home, I get a chance for a little bit of family time as well. But yeah, Champions League midweek coming up as well. So for me, under no stress, 2 games in a matter of 4 or 5 days is a light load. I remember, there are times I think I've done 8 or 9 matches in a week. So 2 over a 4 or 5 day period means I'm feeling quite relaxed going into the weekend.
Amazing. All right, guys, you heard it. I hope you're going to be tuning in next time. Richard is going to be commentating on perhaps on your favorite team. And I'm going to catch you fairly soon in the next one. All right, cheers, guys. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube for more content like that. Okay, bye, guys.